Okay, on this week's episode of Horror Timelines, we're covering the Pumpkinhead series, and I have a special guest. I have a legend here. I have Alec Gillis from Studio ADI. Amazing special effects. He's nominated for an Oscar.
Well, two, to be.
Two.
I'm a two-time Oscar-losing visual effects artist.
Which is way more Oscars than I've lost. So that is also there. But we're going to be talking about the Pumpkinhead series and its continuity. I'm also going to ask Gillis a lot about his background and actually some studio things he's worked for. This guy worked with Stan Winston, so he is with some of the best. He actually has a special surprise over here as well.
Yes, I wanted to show you this. This is my casting of my original sculpture of Pumpkinhead. And it's gray because we recently scanned it for a toy company who was making a toy out of it. And very often the toys they're just not accurate enough for my taste. So I was looking at so I wanted to make sure the head was accurate. So hopefully it'll come out and you'll love it, but that's why this one's gray.
Well, that is amazing, and that is fantastic. And how old is this? How long has this been around?
Well, I made this cast just before I left Stan Winston's in 87.
87.
Right during the production of A Gnome Named Norm. No, I didn't bail because of that.
Okay, all right.
No, I left Stan's on great terms. Tom Woodruff and I did, and we formed this company probably a year and a half after we left, or a year maybe. But this was my kind of like, Stan allowed me to cast this up. I was very proud of this monster and this sculpture, and it's only grown in its in the affection in the public for which we never expected.
No, and I got to tell you, for an effect that is for a cast that is 30 years old, it held up pretty well.
Yeah, it's looking good. Yeah. We still like the day he was birthed by Haggis,
yes,
the witch.
Well, and then let's see if the continuity of the series holds up as well as that cast did. The Great Pumpkin rose in 1988 with the original Vengeance the Demon, which thankfully changed its name back to Pumpkinhead before actual release. This is the one film directed by special effects master Stan Winston.
Son, where is Son? Son.
We don't talk about that one. This kicks off in 1957 with some brief glimpses of the creature and young Ed Harley, and then cuts to the present. Anytime a movie says that, I assume it means the year that was released, so it's most likely 1988, and that little boy is a lot more bishopy. His son is a sort of a prototype Jonathan Lipnicki, and Ed looked around 8 in the flashback, so he'd be born around 49, so if the film was set in real time, he'd be almost 40 here, and Lance Henriksen was actually pushing 50 at the time. We meet a group of teens or college kids or possibly 30-year-olds.
It was the 80s, who could tell?
The kids tell a story of Pumpkinhead who comes to punish the wicked like reckless boys on motorcycles. When little Billy gets run down, most of them take off, and when Ed discovers what happened, well, let's just say he's not too happy. He goes seeking revenge, and is led to old Haggis's cabin. She sends him to the pet cemetery to a very special grave to bring back the Eraserhead baby, which grows up rather rapidly. Ed goes to his wife's grave, and she died in 1978, possibly in childbirth. If we're assuming that this is 1988, then that makes Billy 10 years old. Meanwhile, the kids take refuge in their cabin, and the demon shows up and starts taking his revenge. Each time it kills someone, Ed feels the effects of it, and our big guy gets his full reveal, and it's just amazing. If you ever doubted 80s practical effects, all you have to watch is this movie, and you're cured. Bullets don't hurt him, and what's with the flashing lights? The remaining kids get help from country yokel Bunt, and the big guy doesn't much like churches, and seriously, where are these lights coming from? And I mean, you've gotta love a movie that just flat out enjoys showing you the monster. Ed becomes more monstrous, while P-Head becomes more human, and the two are linked in pain as Ed injuries carry over to the demon. He realizes this and shoots himself, and Tracy shoots him again for good measure to finish the job. It burns, but makes me wonder, what would have happened if he weren't killed? Would he have continued to turn more and more human? What happens to him if he completes his mission? Does he turn into Ed Harley and continue on while Ed becomes the proto-Pumpkinhead for the next Vengeance Seeker? Regardless, Haggis buries Ed in the stump and prepares for the next time she's called upon. It took a pretty long time for that to happen, and it wasn't until 1994, 6 years later, that we got Pumpkinhead II Blood Wings.
Oh, it's called Blood Wings. So I think that means that in this one, Pumpkinhead's gonna have wings, right? He's bound to have wings.
Bloody wings, I guess.
We kick off back in 1958, so this bit is just 1 year after the opening bit from the first film. And we meet our young, deformed Tommy, who's killed by a group of bullies. It then flashes to what it says is today, so again, we'll assume the year of release of 94. And Larry Cotton is here. And so is his daughter, whose real dad is a monkey. There's also Danny here, who we last saw getting burned up with his zombie girlfriend, and Punky Brewster, who I just covered getting eaten by piranhas. The mayor's here, whose brother held a much bigger office in reality, and the kids accidentally run down Tommy's mom. Her name's Mrs. O.C., and a different character than Haggis from the first one, and they go to her cabin and find her trying to resurrect Tommy, and she curses them. They dig up Tommy and cast a spell while Ms. Ozzy burns, and Pumpkinhead/Tommy is reborn. He starts killing, and there's those damn lights again.
I guess Pumpkinhead travels with his own strobe light. It's just with him.
Linnea makes a quick appearance, and the big guy leaves his mark near his victims, and they say that they're Blood Wings.
Oh, those are the Blood Wings.
Yeah, we're not going to see him with wings.
No.
Sheriff Braddock flashes back to when he was 7 and met Tommy, and they say Tommy died 35 years ago, which makes this actually set in 1993. Victor Crowley shows up, and then Ms. Ossie says that Tommy's dad is Pumpkinhead, but you'll forgive me, but we've seen our boy's private parts, and well, he's not looking pretty capable of baby making. They reveal that after it gets revenge for Tommy by killing a bunch of bullies, it'll then turn towards the kids that hurt Miss Ossie, and I love the idea here that Pumpkinhead snuck into the judge's house, painted a whole bunch of blood wings all over the walls with him in the next room over, and then just left, just so that he could then break down the door to make a more dramatic entrance. He makes short work of the group of teens until only Jenny is left, and Tommy Head recognizes Sean as the man who saved him, but is shot and drops back into the well. So can we discuss for 1 second the idea that Tommy was Pumpkinhead's son? I mean, does the big guy seem like the type to be distracted by sex? And who exactly is doing the deed with him anyway? Ms. Ossie? Was it consensual? There's just so many questions. A 12-year lull happened, and it wasn't until 2006 that the Sci-Fi Network debuted Pumpkinhead Ashes to Ashes, directed by Evil Aliens director Jake West. We kick off with Pumpkinhead and Ed Harley returns, and this here is Bunt all grown up, so we're in continuity with the first one and quite a while later. So Doc's a killer and a mortician who sells body parts and dumps the corpses, but when his operation is uncovered and the bodies are found, Ed Harley's corpse is dug up, complete with necklace, although he looks less pumpkin-y than we last saw. Haggis reappears and the townsfolk call upon her to call up Pumpkinhead to get revenge for their loved ones. He starts doing his thing with the people who called him feeling the effects, and speaking of effects, look at this amazing CGI Pumpkinhead. The dog figures out that he can kill Pumpkinhead by killing those who have summoned him, but he seems to know a thing or two about summoning himself. One thing to note as well is that Bunt comments that Pumpkinhead looks bigger than before, and as the summoners die, he gets smaller. They cremate all the old bodies, and I just noticed that the big guy has lost his strobe-like backups, but the summoners start to feel the change. Bunt gets shot, the doc gets tailed, and the last summoner kills herself, saving Bunt. Pumpkinhead turns back to Ed Harley and then disintegrates, and Haggis collects the next in line. So there's a few ways to go here, since promotional material claimed that this one was 20 years after the first. So if that one was indeed set in 88, that would make this one in 2008. And let's take 1 second to understand Pumpkinhead, as we know that this is the first time he's called since the first film, since they used Ed Harley's form. You could set the second one aside and say that it's a different continuity, hence him not using Harley's form, but it's more likely that since it manifests in Tommy, Pumpkinhead's son, and that demon acts differently since it shows mercy and is killed by bullets, that it's most likely its own manifestation and a different thing than the original. This one is a direct manifestation of the original, hence it acting similarly with the rules of the first film and using the form of Ed Harley. Parts 3 and 4 were filmed back to back, so 1 year later, Sci-Fi aired 2007's Pumpkinhead Blood Feud. And hey, the strobe light's back! In the intro, a man chased by Pumpkinhead kills the man who called him up, causing the big guy to vanish instead of burst into flames like before, and then Ed Harley shows up, which makes no sense since there's no real connection to him and his story anymore. We bounce to 5 years later, and we meet two opposing families, and they really went with calling them the Hatfields and the McCoys. And they've been feuding since cards were new, and Abner here was 9, and he looks like he's somewhere in his 60s now, so I'm guessing early 70s maybe? So this film should most likely be set somewhere in the 90s, or I guess early 2000s? I guess it could be real time, but it's most likely a bit earlier and possibly set earlier than the last one, which I guess would explain Ed's appearance. There's this whole Romeo and Juliet thing going on, or I guess Ricky and Jody, and Ricky's sister gets killed. So of course he goes to see Haggis, and things are different, as Ricky doesn't have to go to the graveyard, doesn't have to dig up a body, and Haggis goes instead and just creates a fully formed Pumpkinhead from the ground. It's not born from Ed's body, but it also doesn't grow from the girl from the last film's body, so his birth doesn't really match up with the previous films. He's lost his strobe again though, and Ricky feels the effects of his kills. Jody wakes up to Ed in her room and is remarkably calm about it, although this kid says that Ed is the first to call Pumpkinhead, but we know that's not true because he was at minimum the second. And at one point, we even see the big man in the daytime. Ed says coming back is his curse and there's no end to it, so I'm not sure what's so different about him, and no other Pumpkinhead summoners share this curse, except for the fact that they just wanted Lance back. Ricky's our first summoner to not show regret while Pumpy is killing, and the families team up to fight back, and fate finally catches up to the sheriff from the beginning. Finally, in order to save her sister, Jody shoots Ricky, and both he and Pumpkinhead fall into a well. Ed vanishes, and our timeline is in question as this one doesn't really fit in with the rest of the series. Pumpkinhead isn't born from the body of the woman from the previous film unless her corpse was moved, and Ed Harley really has no reason to stick around since his curse was most likely lifted when his body was used in the last film for the form of the demon. I'm going to go ahead and call this one set in 2005, 3 years before the third. There's really nothing that defines the time period as everyone's clothes are backwoodsy anyway, and we can assume that Haggis used another form for Pumpkinhead and was reserving Ed's for a later date. Also, a quick note that in no film do we see the demon actually complete his task, so we never see what happens when he does. It's insinuated that he completes his task in the prologue of the first film, but we never see the results and what happens to him afterwards. Does he replace the summoner as suggested by him looking more like Ed at the ending of the first film, even though in none of the later films did the summoners start to take on the form of Pumpkinhead like that one? Does Pumpkinhead simply vanish?
Does someone want to let me make a movie about one of these things? I'll make it about that.
Pumpkinhead has also appeared in other media, including a video game, as well as a couple comic book series, including a recent one from Dynamite that explored the idea that Pumpkinhead is only one of 7 demons that can be called. It was pretty cool, and the concept that Pumpy was one of the 7 deadly sins was pretty interesting.
So they have it as 4 movies that don't, they kind of try to tie together, but they don't really make any sense. They do try and have a continuity in there. Ed Harley appears in all of them, well, except for part 2, for no reason whatsoever. And the timeline's a little bit goofy, but, it's Pumpkinhead. They're fairly enjoyable. You said you've seen the first one.
I've only seen the one I worked on.
Yeah, well, it's probably for the best. I mean, part 3 and 4 are sci-fi original movies, and they feel like it. They're none of them are unwatchable.
Yeah.
Like I don't think they're ones that you could watch them and be like mad about the fact that you watched them, but they're just not that good. But I do want to thank Alec for being my special guest here. Actually, I'm going to be talking to him a little bit more for a video that you're going to see next week. We're actually going to talk about some more of his works and actually some other projects he's worked on. But that's it for the Pumpkinhead video. Thank you for voting for this one. This was actually your guys' choice to see this one, and it's Halloween, so go out and go get some candy, and we'll see you next week for an interview with this guy.
I'll be wearing the same shirt.
Yeah, me too.